The hills rose in soft layers against the morning sky, their edges blurred by fog. I stood at the trailhead with my backpack, feeling out of place among the strangers tightening their laces, checking their gear, adjusting their hats. I wasn't here for the thrill of it, not really. I wasn't a hiker, not in the real sense. I just needed to get away, from work, from the noise of the city, from myself most of all. When I booked the retreat, it felt like pressing pause on a life that had started to move too fast without ever really going anywhere. That's when I first saw him. Daniel. He leaned against a weathered wooden post, arms crossed loosely, like the mountain was his living room and we were all just guests passing through. His frame was tall, steady, broad enough to carry authority without saying a word. Sunlight cut through the thinning fog, brushing against his face, and I caught the color of his eyes, hazel, warm but sharp, like they noticed more than they let on. "You're here for the overnight?" he asked when I stepped forward. His voice was low, even, carrying easily without force. "Yeah," I said, shifting my pack on my shoulder. "First time." Something flickered across his face, not amusement exactly, but interest. "Good," he murmured. "First times are the purest." I didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it, I wanted to. We set out soon after, a small group of 7 trailing behind him as he led us up the dirt path. The fog clung to the trees, muffling our voices. People talked for a while, about jobs, cities, the weather, but eventually their words faded, swallowed by the steady rhythm of boots against soil. Daniel walked just ahead of me, his stride unhurried but certain. Every so often he'd glance back, not only to check if the group was together but, and maybe this was in my head, to check on me. Once, when the trail curved and opened to a ledge overlooking the valley, I stopped to catch my breath. The clouds shifted, revealing sunlight breaking against the hills below. I looked up to find him watching me instead of the view. It wasn't the casual glance of a guide making sure his hiker was all right. It lingered, steady, almost like he was memorizing me. When our eyes met, something in my chest tightened. I looked away too quickly, pretending to be fascinated by the ridgeline. Still, the weight of his gaze stayed with me as we moved on. That evening we reached a small clearing tucked between pines, where Daniel set up a fire with quiet efficiency. He didn't give orders or raise his voice, but somehow the group followed his rhythm, pitching tents, unrolling mats, laughing tiredly as they settled in. By the time darkness crept over the hills, most had drifted into their tents, leaving only the 2 of us by the fire. Flames flickered across his face, drawing out the lines of focus, softening his edges. He leaned back on his elbows, looking entirely at home under the stars. "Why'd you sign up for this?" he asked suddenly, his eyes on the fire, though his question was meant for me. I hesitated, the truth catching in my throat. Needed a break. From everything. He nodded once, like he understood more than I had said. "The hills are good for that. They strip the noise away." When he finally looked at me, it wasn't brief. It was deliberate. There was no smile, no playful spark. Just something steady and unspoken, the kind of look that makes you feel seen in a way you can't explain. The night was quiet, except for the fire's crackle and the hum of insects in the trees. And as I sat there under his gaze, I felt the air change. Subtle but undeniable. I thought the night would end there, fading into sleep. But the way he looked at me, unflinching, almost searching, told me it wasn't just another night in the hills. Something had begun. The morning broke clear, the fog lifting into thin strands of white that curled away from the trees. We packed camp quietly, the other hikers grumbling about sore legs and early hours. By the time the trail split, 2 of them decided to turn back with an assistant guide. Suddenly it was just me and Daniel moving forward. I tried to act casual about it, but my chest felt too tight, my hands too aware of their own movements. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was full, of the things we weren't saying, of the glances I wasn't sure I imagined. The path narrowed into a steep climb, dirt soft beneath the soles of my boots. Daniel walked ahead, his pace measured, each step certain. I matched him, though my breathing grew heavier. When the incline sharpened, he slowed just enough to let me catch up. At one point, the trail turned to loose rock. My foot slid, heart lurching as I reached for balance. Before I could fall, his hand shot back, strong and steady. "Got you," he murmured, pulling me forward with surprising ease. His palm wrapped firmly around mine, rough with calluses, warm despite the cool air. For a moment, it felt like the world stilled, the wind pausing in the trees, the earth tilting under our joined hands. He didn't let go right away. He held on, eyes flicking back to mine, something unspoken flashing there. When he finally released me, the absence was sharper than the slip had been. My hand tingled, empty. We pressed on, the trail winding higher until the clouds opened into a pale stretch of sky. My heartbeat had calmed by then, though not because the climb was easy. By midday, gray clouds rolled in, dragging the air heavy with rain. Daniel scanned the ridge and pointed toward an outcrop of stone jutting like a natural roof. "We'll shelter there." The space beneath the overhang was small, just enough to keep us dry. We dropped our packs, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the cool ground. My knee brushed against his, and though it would have been natural to shift away, I didn't. Neither did he. The rain came fast, pattering against rock and soil. The sound filled the silence, but it didn't drown out the nearness of him. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, subtle but constant, like a fire banked under the surface. I tried not to stare, but my eyes betrayed me, tracing the line of his jaw as he leaned forward, the damp strands of hair clinging near his temple, the way his lips pressed into thought. He turned slightly, catching me mid-glance. I looked away too quickly, but heat rose to my face all the same. The rain went on, heavy and insistent. A chill crept into the air, and instinctively I pulled my jacket tighter. Without a word, Daniel shifted closer, his shoulder pressing fully into mine now. The gesture was small, almost nothing, but it sent a quiet tremor through me. I told myself it was practical. Space was tight. The weather was cold. It meant nothing. But as minutes stretched into hours, and his presence sank deeper into me, I knew I was lying to myself. When the rain finally softened, he stood, offering me his hand again. I hesitated a second, then placed mine in his. The ease of the motion, the quiet trust in it, made my chest ache. As he pulled me to my feet, I felt the weight of it, too close, too warm, too steady. Too close to be nothing. And yet neither of us said a word. We shouldered our packs, stepped back onto the trail, and let the silence carry the truth neither of us dared to voice. The rain didn't stop until evening. By then the trail had turned to mud, our boots heavy, our clothes damp. Daniel led us off the main path into a grove of tall pines where the ground was firmer, sheltered from the worst of the storm. We pitched the tent quickly, our movements practiced now, almost wordless. By the time we crawled inside, the last of the light had drained from the sky. The world outside was gray and wet, but inside, the air was warm with the closeness of two bodies and the faint smell of pine still clinging to our clothes. The tent was small, barely wide enough for our sleeping bags side by side. When I lay down, I could feel the fabric of his bag brushing against mine. Every shift, every breath seemed amplified in the cramped space. I stared at the roof, listening to the rain drum overhead in steady rhythm. I wanted to say something, anything to break the weight of the silence, but nothing felt right. Words seemed clumsy, unnecessary. "You're quiet," he said at last, his voice low, close. "So are you," I replied, turning my head slightly toward him. In the dim light from his lantern, I caught the faint curve of his lips, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement. "Silence says more sometimes," he murmured. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt too tight. The truth was, the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of questions I didn't know how to ask, of something building that I wasn't sure either of us was ready to name. At some point he shifted in his bag, rolling closer. His hand brushed against mine. The contact was feather-light, almost accidental. Almost. But he didn't move it away. I froze, every nerve awake, my palm burning from the touch. The rain kept falling. I thought of all the things I could say to make sense of the moment, a joke, an excuse, anything, but the words dissolved before they could leave me. Instead, I let the silence stretch, let it wrap around us. When I finally found the courage to look over, he was already watching me. His hazel eyes, softened by the shadows, held something I hadn't seen before. Not the steady assurance of a guide, not the distance of a stranger. Something closer. Something bare. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the space between our hands, the weight of his gaze, the unspoken words pressing against the air. I wanted to ask him what this was. I wanted to tell him I felt it too. But all I managed was to hold still, breathing with him, letting the silence speak where I couldn't. He didn't say anything more either. But the way he looked at me told me enough. The rain carried us into sleep, steady and unrelenting, but I didn't dream of the storm. I dreamed of the space between us, so close, so fragile, yet so impossibly full. When I woke once in the night, the tent was dark and his breathing was deep, steady. Our hands were still close, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of him lingering there. Something had shifted. Quietly, without words. And I knew as I closed my eyes again, that silence would never mean the same thing after this. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the hills washed clean. The air smelled sharper, brighter, as if every leaf had been rinsed in silver. We set out early, boots squelching in the soft ground, our breath visible in the chill. The trail grew steeper, slick with mud and loose stones. Daniel walked ahead, moving with the kind of steady rhythm that spoke of years spent on these paths. I tried to match him, but my body ached from the climb, my steps less certain. It happened fast. One wrong placement, one rock sliding under my boot. My foot went out from under me and the ground rushed upward. Before I could hit the earth, his arm was there. Strong. Certain. He caught me against his chest, his hand pressing flat and firm over my heart. For a moment, the mountain stilled. My breath caught. All I could feel was the heat of his palm, the solid weight of his body bracing mine. His face hovered close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of green in his hazel eyes, the lines of focus etched around them. "You okay?" he asked, his voice roughened by the climb but low too, like he didn't want the world to hear. "Yeah," I managed, though my chest wasn't steady under his touch. But he didn't let go. Not right away. His hand stayed there, pressed to me as if making sure my heart was still beating. And it was too fast, too loud. I knew he could feel it. Seconds stretched. I felt the tremor in his breath, the hesitation in his eyes. And then, slowly, deliberately, he drew his hand back. The loss was immediate, a coldness rushing in where warmth had been. We didn't speak of it. We climbed on. The world around us filled with birdsong and the rush of distant streams, but between us, silence was heavier than ever. Later, when the sun sank low, painting the hills in amber light, we made camp again. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the dimming air. I sat close, letting the heat lick at my skin, but my thoughts weren't on the flames. Daniel sat across from me, shoulders squared, gaze lowered as he adjusted his gear. Yet I could feel it, the weight of his glance when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point, our eyes met across the fire. Not a long look, not like before. Just a flicker, a split second. But it was enough to bring everything back. His hand against my chest, the steadiness of his hold, the way he hadn't wanted to let go. I turned away, staring into the flames until my vision blurred. My chest still felt the echo of him. When the others had gone to their tents, I lingered, the quiet pulling tighter around us. He stayed too, sitting a few feet away. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved closer. But the firelight painted his face in gold and shadow, and for the first time, I thought I saw the same confusion in him that lived in me. The touch had been brief. Practical even. But it hadn't faded. It clung to me, not as an accident, not as nothing, but as something I couldn't name, something I couldn't shake. And I knew as I finally crawled into my sleeping bag that night, that it wasn't going away. It was the touch that stayed. The next day the mountain opened up. The trail curved along a ridge that overlooked the valley, vast and endless, with rivers cutting silver lines through the green below. The sky was clearer than it had been all trip, a pale blue stretched wide like it had no end. I should have been awed by the view. Instead, all I felt was the weight of him beside me. Daniel stood with his hands on his hips, breathing steady, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I tried to mirror him, tried to lose myself in the sweep of the landscape. But my eyes kept sliding to him instead. The way the wind lifted strands of his hair. The faint rise and fall of his chest. The quiet strength in how he carried himself, even standing still. For a long time neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was charged, like standing in the space between a question and its answer. Finally he broke it. "You ever wonder," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it before, "why things happen the way they do?" I turned my head, caught off guard by the intimacy of the question. "Sometimes," I admitted. His eyes stayed on the horizon, but his jaw tightened, like he was working up the courage to keep going. "Because this," he paused, exhaled slowly. Then he looked at me, really looked. "This doesn't feel like nothing." The words hit deeper than I was ready for, though they echoed the same thought I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest. I swallowed hard, throat dry. "It doesn't," I whispered. The air shifted then, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that I didn't need to look down to know our hands could touch if either of us moved an inch. His gaze searched mine, hesitant but steady, as if waiting for me to deny it, to laugh it off, to run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I let the moment happen. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against mine. The contact was light, almost fragile, but it hit me harder than anything else could have. My eyes slipped closed and for a second the world disappeared, no ridge, no valley, no sky, no climb. Just the press of him against me, our breath mingling in the quiet, our bodies trembling with the truth we'd stopped pretending wasn't there. I didn't move. Neither did he. And in that stillness, I realized how much I had been waiting for this without knowing it. When he finally pulled back, it was slow, reluctant. His eyes lingered on me a beat longer before he turned toward the horizon again, his expression unreadable. We didn't speak after that. There was no need. The confession had already been made, not in words alone, but in the closeness, in the silence, in the soft press of skin against skin. And as we stood on that ridge, the valley stretching wide beneath us, the question circled through my mind. What if this is real? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew I wanted to find it. That evening, the trail led us into a quiet hollow where the pines arched high and the ground was soft with needles. We set up camp without a word, the silence no longer heavy but alive, humming with something fragile and new. The fire burned low, casting a circle of light that barely reached the trees. Daniel sat beside me, closer than he had before, his knee brushing mine in a way that felt intentional now. I didn't move. For a while we just listened, to the wood snapping in the flames, to the whisper of the wind through branches, to our breaths filling the spaces in between. It was peaceful, but it carried weight, like the quiet had chosen us, wrapping us in something we didn't dare disturb. Then he spoke, low and thoughtful. The first time I hiked these hills I got lost. Spent the whole night wandering in circles, convinced I'd never find my way back. I turned my head, surprised at the softness in his voice. What happened? He gave a small shrug, eyes on the fire. The sun came up, and suddenly everything looked different. The path was always there, I just couldn't see it in the dark. The way he said it, I knew he wasn't just talking about the trail. I found myself telling him things I hadn't planned to share. About feeling restless in my own life, about drifting through days without knowing where I was going, about how I'd signed up for this trip hoping to clear my head but finding only more questions. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, really listened, his eyes steady, his expression soft in the firelight. And when I faltered, unsure if I'd said too much, he shook his head gently. It makes sense, he said. More than you think. Something inside me eased at that. At some point he leaned back against a fallen log and I followed, our shoulders pressing together. The contact was simple, natural. But it anchored me, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We sat that way for a long time, watching the flames sink into embers. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence, of trust, of something beginning to take root. When I finally turned to look at him, he was already watching me. His eyes held mine, steady but questioning, as if asking permission for something neither of us could name. I didn't look away this time. Slowly he leaned in, his movements unhurried, deliberate, giving me every chance to stop him. I didn't. Our lips brushed, tentative, barely there. It wasn't a kiss, not fully, more like a promise. A test. A breath shared between us. It lasted only a heartbeat, but when we pulled back, the world felt different. Bigger. Brighter. My chest ached with the weight of it, with the realization settling deep inside me. I hadn't known I was waiting for this, but I had been all along. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The fire dimmed, the night wrapped close, and the quiet between us felt sacred, like a secret the hills themselves were keeping. When we finally lay down in the tent, side by side, our shoulders brushed, our breaths fell into rhythm. Sleep came slowly but peacefully, carrying with it the sense that I was no longer wandering in circles. I had found something, or maybe someone, I hadn't known I'd been searching for. And in that silence, in that closeness, I realized, I didn't know I was waiting. But I had been. The last morning broke clear and golden. The hills, still damp from the storm, glistened as if they'd been polished overnight. A thin mist clung low to the valleys, but the ridge above was already warm under the early sun. I woke to the sound of birds, their calls sharp and bright. For a moment I forgot where I was, until I turned and saw him. Daniel was already awake, lying on his side in his sleeping bag, his head propped on his hand. He wasn't watching the fire pit or the sky through the flap. He was watching me. The sight stopped me, stole the breath from my chest. His gaze wasn't heavy, wasn't searching like before. It was lighter now, almost gentle, like the tension we'd carried had eased into something steadier. "Morning," I whispered. "Morning," he echoed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. We packed slowly, without the rush of the earlier days. The trail was all downhill now, leading us back toward the noise of the world we'd left behind. Still, neither of us seemed eager to break the rhythm we'd found. He walked beside me instead of ahead. Our strides matched, easy. Every so often our hands brushed. At first by accident. Then not. Eventually, his fingers found mine, tentative but certain once they laced together. The touch was simple, unremarkable to anyone else. But to me it felt like an anchor, like something solid I could finally hold on to. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to. The descent felt different than the climb. The landscape that had seemed so vast and intimidating on the way up now felt familiar, softened by memory. Each bend in the trail carried echoes of what had happened. His steadying hand, the silence in the tent, the firelight on his face, the brush of his lips against mine. When the trees thinned and the first signs of the base camp appeared, my chest tightened. The end was near. The real world waited just beyond the hills. We paused at a clearing, the valley sprawling below us one last time. Daniel dropped his pack, taking in the view. I did the same. "This is where I usually stop," he said after a moment. "Before I go back down." "Why?" I asked. He glanced at me, the sun catching in his hazel eyes. "Because I like to leave the hills slowly. Gives me a chance to take it with me." I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "Makes sense." The silence stretched, but it was different now, easier, gentler, almost warm. Finally he spoke again, voice low. "I don't know what this is." He shifted, his gaze steady but uncertain. "I don't know if it's just the mountain or the quiet or us. But I don't want it to end here." My throat tightened. I searched for words, for something that could match the weight of what he just said. All I found was honesty. "Neither do I whispered. His smile was small, almost shy, but it reached his eyes. We stood there for a long while, not making promises, not naming anything. Just holding the moment, the air, the possibility of it. When we finally shouldered our packs again, his hand brushed mine once more. This time I caught it first. The camp came into view soon after. Other hikers, cars in the distance, the edges of the world seeping back in. But between us, it stayed quiet, steady, unshaken. At the bottom of the hill we stopped. People moved around us, laughing, calling out, but it all blurred into background noise. He looked at me, his expression calm but full, like the mountain itself lived in his eyes. "Whatever this becomes," he said softly, "I'm glad it happened." The word struck something deep in me. Because I felt it too, the sense that no matter what came next, something had already changed. Something I wouldn't trade back for anything. "I am too," I said. And I meant it. We didn't make plans, didn't draw maps of what came after. We didn't need to. As I left the hills that day, the sun warm on my back and the weight of his hand still lingering in mine, I thought about how I had come looking for distance, for clarity, for nothing more than a break. Instead I had found him. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I wouldn't undo it for anything. And whatever this becomes, friendship, love, something unnamed, I know it began here in the hills when the guide led me somewhere else entirely.